Hello. So in this final screencast on the nervous system, we are going to look at how it is organized. We've kind of looked at the brain. We've looked at how signals are sent throughout the nervous system. Now we're going to zoom out a little bit and just kind of look at the nervous system as a whole to understand how it's put together. So recall from the very beginning of this unit that there's these two divisions, the central and peripheral nervous system. Just kind of want to remind you, the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. And I just want to point out that note that the spinal cord is protected by the same structures as the brain. There's pia mater, there's dura mater, and then there's cerebral spinal fluid in between. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that. Note also the gray matter and the white matter, things like that. Today, though, our focus really is on the peripheral nervous system, these nerves that go to and from the brain and spinal cord. And before we get into how it's organized, I just want to make sure we all know what a nerve is. All a nerve is it's a bundle of neurons. So here's a single axon from one neuron, and we just bundle a bunch of those together, and then we bundle the bundles together, and we have ourselves a nerve. So these divisions that we talk about, they're not very easy to identify in terms of anatomical differences. These divisions are more functional divisions within the nervous system, so you can't really point to it on a diagram necessarily. They're more functional. So let's just kind of break down what are the functional divisions of what the nervous system does. So the first division is the sensory versus the motor division. The sensory information division brings sensory information from the sense organs to the central nervous system. And the motor division is going to send motor information from the central nervous system out to the muscles. So if I'm seeing something, information is coming in through my sensory division. If I'm moving, then that's the motor division, okay? Pretty straightforward. Now, the motor division can be further subdivided into a somatic and autonomic division. The somatic division controls voluntary movements. So if I'm like moving my arms, my head, my eyes, these are all somatic division movements. Autonomic division controls involuntary movements. Autonomic movements are things like the movement of food through your digestive tract, or your heartbeat, or your blood vessels can sort of constrict and expand to regulate blood pressure. That's an involuntary movement. You have no control over that. One area that's kind of confusing to kids, the diaphragm is the muscle involved in breathing. That actually is a voluntary movement. Even though you don't think about breathing, you can control your breathing if you want. So you can choose to take a high breath, a deep breath, or a shallow breath. And so since you do have some sort of control over that, it is considered to be a voluntary muscle, even though you don't consciously have to think about it most of the time. Now here's where it gets a little confusing. The autonomic division can further be subdivided into sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. For sympathetic, think fight or flight. This is what prepares you for action. For parasympathetic, think rest and digest. This is what calms you down and stimulates digestion. So let's figure out what that all means, because that's a little weird, right? So I have a video clip here. You may have even seen this. It's kind of fun. Basically, it's this commercial that shows this little car. And before seeing the commercial, I tell kids there's like a ghost. It's very faint, so watch very closely. And so kids are like looking very closely at the screen, and this car is passing through this serene green meadow, and then all of a sudden, this like creature leaps out at the screen, and kids are like, ah! And they like freak out, and their hearts are racing, their eyes are blooded out, like, ah! The reason I torture my children in this way is because that is the sympathetic nervous system. That response, that freak out, that is your sympathetic nervous system kicking in. So here's how it works. Think fight or flight. So if you're being chased by a bear and you either have to fight the bear or run away from the bear, what do you need? Well, you need to increase your heart rate. Well, the sympathetic system does that. You need to dilate your airways. You need to stimulate the release of adrenaline. You dilate your eyes so that you can take in more information. So the sympathetic division is kicking all these systems into gear to help you fight or run away, flight. On the other hand, it's going to act as a brake on other things. Digestion is a low priority if you're being attacked by a bear. So it inhibits salivation. It inhibits digestion in the stomach. It inhibits the movement of food through the intestines. The parasympathetic is the opposite. It's going to stimulate salivation, stimulate digestion, stimulate movement of food through the digestive system. But on the other hand, it will slow down the heartbeat, constrict the pupil, and so forth. So basically, you can think of the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. They act as an accelerator and a brake for each of these organs. And the one that is the accelerator and the one that is the brake depends on the organ. So if you just remember fight or flight and rest and digest, it kind of helps you make sense of which one is which. Now, this kind of explains some interesting things. So after like a big, huge meal, you might have yourself a food coma. You're like, oh, I'm so tired. Well, the reason for that is because the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for rest and digest. So if you have a big meal, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in to help stimulate the digestion of that meal, but then it also calms you down, rest and digest. And so after a big meal, I'm like, oh man, I'm going parasympathetic. That's like my phrase. I'm trying to make it like popular amongst the world as a whole. I'm going parasympathetic. It just means, oh man, I'm resting and digesting, baby. I got nothing. And that's why you feel blah after that. The final thing I wanted to talk about with regard to the peripheral nervous system is reflexes. And a reflex, all it is it's a simple automatic response to a stimulus. That's it, just an automatic response. So if I throw a ball at you really quickly and you catch it, that's not a reflex because that's not automatic. You had a choice to dodge it, to bat out of the way. A reflex is automatic, no choice in the matter. So examples of this, if you touch a hot stove, your hand is going to be like, ha, and you pull it away before you even realize you've touched the hot stove. The gag reflex, if you've ever had a strep test, this very kindly person will say ah, and you in a very trusting kind way, like ah, very sweetly, and then they stick this cotton swab on the back of your throat to try and scrape off any bacteria that might be there, so they can see if it's strep. And when they do that, they trigger the gag reflex. You're like ah, and then they stick this thing in, ah, and then you like gag. And then they're like, got it, and then they run off to do their test. So those are both reflexes. And note that many, but not all reflexes are controlled by the spinal cord. And so, if you get stabbed by a pin, you're going to jerk away. Well, that information goes from the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. It synapses onto an interneuron here, which then synapses onto a motor neuron, and then goes to the muscle, so you pull away. So if you get stabbed, I'm trying to do this in the hand, it kind of goes and then travels to my spinal cord, and then back to my hand, and ah. So that's kind of what a reflex is. Interestingly, babies have more reflexes than adults. And this is because they're sort of pre-programmed with certain behaviors needed for survival. So you could pull up the slideshow and watch these little videos. I'll just tell you about them real quick. The rooting reflex is for nursing. So if you scratch on a newborn baby's cheek, it will turn and then start sucking on your finger. And that's for feeding. So that it can breastfeed. So that helps it latch on to the breast or bottle. The grasp reflex, if you have a newborn baby's hand, you just stick a pen or a finger in there, it'll grab on. And I call it baby death grip. I remember my son when he was a baby, I'd be like, I couldn't shake him, man. He was just on there. That's actually there because of our primate ancestors, monkeys who move through trees. If you've ever seen videos of monkeys, their babies will just cling to their back. And so that grasp reflex is there so that they can just cling with a death grip to the back as the mom is leaping from branch to branch to branch. In humans, if you remember the term vestigial structure from biology last year, it's one of those. It's one of those structures that evolution, it doesn't really serve a function anymore, but we have it because of that evolutionary history. If you kind of put a baby on the ground, it'll kind of walk, sort of. There's this walking reflex. Babinski's this weird, don't worry about that one. But then there's this underwater dunk reflex. If you take a newborn and just dunk it underwater, it will just naturally hold its breath and be like, it's cool. Obviously you can't hold it down for very long because it needs air. But babies are very unalarmed at being dunked underwater, which is kind of weird. But if you think about it, they spent the first 9 months of their existence developing in this watery amniotic fluid environment inside their mother. So they're quite at home in the water. So yeah, these reflexes are there to stay alive because babies, they're not the sharpest tools in the drawer just yet. They need a little more brain development. They're not like, I'm hungry, I'm gonna go make a sandwich. No, there's like, and so you, and then it starts feeding. So that kind of thing keeps them alive. So that's it for the peripheral nervous system. Thanks.